What's the difference between the simulation on the left and the simulation on the right? Well, I'll tell you, it's not only the food density. In fact, in one of them, there is a fatal flaw. The one on the left ends up like this after 10 minutes. As you can see, the run is healthy. Whereas the run on the right, well, disaster after only 5 minutes. Hello guys and welcome. Today I want to tell you a story. This story is one filled with hopes, dreams, and failures. Failures so bad that they made me question my chosen path in life, namely working on this simulation. But don't you worry, this story actually has a happy ending. This can be plainly seen from the simulation that is currently being shown on the screen. Maybe you already noticed in the top right corner of the screen, but all images shown so far are from different simulations using the same seed. So, as you can see from this one, I eventually got it right. So let me take you back to the version of me from a few days ago and show you what it's been like. Ah, finally, my work is done. Look, we have ocean currents now. Look how beautiful they are. No more static world. Everything is moving around. And look, we have nutrient fields as well. Things aren't spawning from thin air anymore, no. Now the world makes sense. Now we have the tools to build a rich simulation. And I'm really sure that nothing can go wrong and my creatures will enjoy their new environment. Now let's test this. I have this seed that in the previous version of the game led to really successful creatures. Let's test it against the new version of the game. I'm sure that these boys will be as good now as they were before. Well, things aren't looking too healthy right now, but I'm sure this is a temporary setback. And these guys will manage to bounce right back. Well, there goes another one. Well, but no, I'm sure we'll still find 5 population is enough. Oh, 4 is cutting. Oh, 3, 2. Oh, what? No, what's going on? No, what? What's going on, man? Come on. No, this makes no sense. So I embarked on a quest to look more closely at these creatures and figure out why weren't they more successful like they once were. What was different in this case? Good thing we have all these creature stats panels to help us figure out what was going on. But nope, can't really tell that easily from this. But I'll tell you this. Right now on the screen you can already see the problem and why these creatures are failing. Can you figure it out? If yes, leave a comment and tell me what you thought when you saw these panels. But I promise you that by the end of the video, the mystery will be solved and the fatal flaw that is hidden in these images will be made apparent to you. But let's get back to our investigation. So I loaded up an older version of the simulation, used the same seed that worked before on this version, and tried to look more carefully at our creatures to see if I can spot the difference. Again, in these panels, the difference is really obvious, but I did not really see it at the time. What I could see though is that these creatures were more successful. And after only 10 minutes of simulation time, the creatures already established a healthy population and everything was going great. But why? Why though? What's the difference between this version of the simulation and the newer version of the simulation that allows these creatures to be successful? Well, that was the question, and I planned on figuring it out. My first idea was maybe it's the food. Maybe we had more food in this version and we have less food in that version. In Anaximander, we use plant archetypes to control which types of food we spawn during the run. This is because we want to implement plant evolution at one point. So archetypes allow us to scaffold basic plants on top of some basic plant genetics. In this older version of the simulation, we use the plant archetype called huge plants. These plants are really large and contain a lot of energy. In the newer version of the simulation, we're using more conservative plants. They're smaller and less dense. But what I try to do is to keep the plant biomass that we spawn in the world the same. So this means that there should be the same amount of food in both iterations, right? Right, so if I look at the beginning of the new version of the simulation, the total biomass counter in the HUD stays roughly the same. So it's not a problem with food availability, no. There has to be something else going on here. The question is what? And the problem is that only from the in-simulation panels I don't have enough information. So this led to a multi-hour coding fest where I added more telemetry than I had before. I was particularly looking for some things that I observed during running the simulation between the two versions. One of them was that it seemed to me that the creatures rotated more in this version of the simulation than in the older version of the simulation. Not necessarily obviously so, but more in a way that they seem to be mindlessly going around without any specific purpose. Whereas in the older build, you can see some rotation going on, yes, but you can also see that they're much more focused on finding food and finding each other, especially after the first generation. In both cases, the first few generations are pretty incompetent. But in the case of the successful creatures, or rather the successful simulation, the creatures become more focused a lot faster. Particularly, they seem to be finding food a lot more consistently, and they seem to be reproducing a lot more frequently as well. I started to suspect that this might also be a matter of geometry. We introduced ocean currents, and we changed the way food spawns. So maybe it's also a problem with the new landscape itself. Maybe it's just too difficult for the naive neural networks to figure out how to find food in a moving world. But in order to figure out which of these things was actually causing the issue, or if it was all of them causing issues, we needed more data, and more crucially, better data. So I expanded the telemetry system that I already have in place in the simulation in order to record anything and everything that could prove helpful in understanding what was going on. So like every would-be scientist, I started looking at charts. This is a chart showing the population evolution in a failed run, while this one is showing the population evolution in the successful run that was running on the older build. Looking at both at the same time, some things become apparent. The successful build seems to have a much steadier population over time. That can indicate that it has more births than the failed run. In both runs you can see where the first generation of the founders has perished in large numbers. But in the successful run you can see how the overall population remains stable, and it even bounces back a lot higher several times during the run. If we look at some aggregate totals, we can see that in the failed run we had only 46 births until the population collapsed to extinction. Whereas in the successful run we had a significantly larger number of total births in the same time period. Next, I wanted to look at the reproduction drive. The reproduction drive is what controls how fast a creature accumulates the energy necessary to reproduce. In the failed run, it seems that this reproduction drive remains somewhat constant over the entire period until extinction. Whereas for the successful run, we can see that it starts off at the same values as for the failed run, but it is much more volatile and has a tendency of going up. I found that to be really interesting. It almost seems like in the failed simulation run, with the new currents and nutrient fields, the creatures are more apathetic, although their brains are the same. Whereas in the older simulation runs, creatures were more active, or at least it seemed that way. But I had one more place to look at in order to find more evidence to support this theory. So what better place to look for apathy than in movement? We're looking at the effective throttle of the failed run. We can see that it's pretty constant over time, hovering at about a quarter impulse. Whereas this is the same chart, but for the successful simulation run. We can immediately see that movement is a lot more volatile, and again it has a tendency of going up over time. So for me, this started to look like confirming my initial theory. There was something in the failed runs that were making the same brains seeded from the same seed to be more apathetic. Something that was damping down the neural outputs across the board. It could be seen in movement, it could be seen in reproduction drive, and in the end, it led to extinction. But what was it? So I hope all of you remember the question that I asked in the beginning. What exactly in this stats panel screams at us that there is an issue? And I also hope that you wrote some comments. I'll be checking your homework. Well, we can look at these creatures and see something really interesting. Look at the smell neurons. Look at the inputs for the smell neurons, particularly for the plants. All of them are saturated at maximum. This jumped out at me when I went over the footage from the simulations that I ran in order to see exactly what was going on. So if we look in the successful builds, we can see that the smell neurons are not that saturated. There's something different between the two, and the difference obviously is coming from the plant density. The larger plant archetypes are a lot less dense than the smaller plant archetypes, and this led to the smell neurons behaving really differently between runs. There is an obvious difference between this stats panel and this one. This is a lot less saturated by the smell neurons. So I went to work in order to redesign the way smell works. So what I did was give each plant and each creature a dedicated smell gene. Let's call it smelliness. This gene controls how strongly a creature or a plant registers to other creatures with their smell inputs. The gene is modifiable by evolution, which means that solutions can be explored via reproduction and mutation, which means that in time, the best solution for smelliness will be discovered, and creatures will have an optimal amount of smell that increases their chance of survival over time. But more importantly, this means that the smell neurons no longer saturate so quickly. And that seems to have had a very good impact on the brain. So this is the same seed after the changes to the smell system were done. And as you can see, both plant smell and creature smell are a lot tamer than in the original version. And As you can also see, this had an incredible result on the run's health. We're 33 generations in and we have a healthy population of over 100 creatures. We can see them that they're active, they know how to pursue food, they're clearly in a lot better shape than the creatures that kept going towards extinction. What I found most interesting about this is that initially we were talking about the same brains that were seeded the same way, only their environments were different, which led to incredibly different outcomes between the two runs. So in the end, it wasn't just one factor that led to the extinction of these creatures with the new landscape of both ocean currents and food. No, it was a combination of different factors. Different factors that in the beginning seemed completely unrelated, but when taken together, they had a very strong impact. So, if I hadn't changed from huge plants to smaller plants, or if I hadn't changed the food density, maybe I wouldn't ever have found out about this issue. Or at least not right now. The reason I changed the food density is that the very large plants that I was using were too expensive to spawn in the world using the new nutrient system. It just didn't make any sense to continue using them. Changing to less dense plants meant that I need to increase their number. That led to the saturation of the smell input neurons, and in the end that led to the inevitable demise of these creatures. Just goes to show you that developing a 2D life simulation isn't as straightforward as it might seem. It actually isn't straightforward at all. But this also was an incredibly interesting experiment in the way brains and environments interact each other to find solutions to the problem of survival. So I'm looking forward to see what new challenges I will face when I will be adding new and even more complex systems to Anaximander. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.